Okay, rear derailleur installation. I just put a tiny bit of grease inside the threading here, and then I'm going to grease the housing. So here's my rear derailleur. It is a Microshift is the company. Microshift is, there are a couple main component manufacturers in the big world of cycling, right? Shimano is the biggest one. Well, maybe the biggest. It has classically been the biggest. And then there's Campagnolo, an Italian manufacturer, and there are some new kids on the block in the last decade or so, and SRAM, S-R-A-M, makes some good stuff. They're making huge innovations in cycling, and they make pretty good equipment. I haven't really gotten into the world of SRAM yet. I'd like to, but this company, Microshift, they're a Taiwanese manufacturer, and they make components that have the same exact actuations and poles and everything as the Shimano components, so everything matches up nicely. So essentially, it's budget. Now this, if this was Shimano, it would be in the pretty much in the derailleur line, which I have a couple of derailleur derailleurs on my other bikes, and I like them. Well, let me get a mass on this. This rear derailleur is it's called a Mezzo. It's their 9-speed group. It's a long cage derailleur. It has a barrel adjuster, and long cage meaning it's this cage in between the two jockey pulleys here. This distance is considered long. That means it can take a lot of chain. It can take a lot of chain, especially when the springs are engaged. This thing has a pretty massive capacity to hold a lot of chain. But I'll show you the ins and outs of this as I get it mounted. But here's the little mounting bolt. So all I'm going to do, put a little bit of grease on there, and that's just going to go right into this spot here. And then before I do anything with the chain, I'm going to mess with my limit screws to make sure that well, I'll talk about that in a second. But I'm just going to get a quick mass on this. It's 322 grams, which is heavy, but it's heavy duty. I mean, this thing is kind of a horse, and it should do the trick really, really well. And the other trick is there's a secondary component on a derailleur. This long screw here is called the B screw. This can be manipulated so that you can swing the derailleur slightly further away from the teeth of the cogs. I may have to screw that down quite a bit because of the... No, I don't think I will. If I was going to try to use a much larger cassette, then I might have an issue, but I shouldn't have any issues with this at all. So all it is tightening this down. I had a tough time putting in the bottom bracket threading, but these threads look pretty good, and the derailleur hanger on this steel frame looks super straight. It doesn't look like it's ever been banged up. Again, hopefully that's true. This thing just gets cranked down nice and snug, and there you go. So now what you can see is the B screw here. This, if I was to screw that in, what it does is it pushes this housing back, which means that these pulleys it gets further away from the cogs. Now again, there's no tension on this right now, so it's hard to show that, but you can see how as this rotates, there's a gap between the jockey pulley, which is the wheel on the derailleur, and the cassette itself. So that gap can be altered by using that B screw. It doesn't look like I'll have to mess with it much. What I do want to mess with are these two screws, and the light isn't perfect right here, but one is the high limit screw and one is the low limit screw. So the high limit screw sets the limit on how far this spring will allow these pulleys to go in the outboard direction or for the high gear, and the low limit screw will set how far it goes into the low cog, the low gear. And that's important because you don't want to be pushing that rear derailleur and then have this I'm going to have to move this limit because I don't want that to be, I don't want to run the risk of that pushing the chain off of the cassette completely and running into, my spokes. That would be awful. So I'm going to have to change that slightly. Okay, so now I'm just going to toy around with my limit screws a tiny bit and get these pulleys lined up exactly where I want them. So this outer this high limit was set too far in. Really, you want it dead even, so that when the chain is lined up and there's tension on it, both of these pulleys are completely in line with that outer cog, and it can't go any further. That's why it's called a limit. It limits it from going any further outboard. The the pull on the derailleur is determined by the cable tension, which we'll get to when I do the cables. But now I'm going to set my low limit screw. I think I'm just going to screw it in a little bit and then check it. Check that, loosen it up a little more, meaning I can go a tiny bit closer to the cassette or to the large cog. Another quarter turn. Do it a quarter turn at a time. Now I've got my limit. High end should be aligned properly. Low end should be aligned properly. It's hard to do. Well, it's not hard to do, but it's hard to know exactly what position these springs are going to take up without the chain of the actual, without the tension of the actual chain running through it, because I don't know the exact position it'll be in with that proper tension. But because as this jockey wheel rotates forward, I have a lot more clearance. I can't tell exactly where it'll be in this span. So if it's like this, I clear all the way through. So I've loosened the B. I've got the B screw all the way in. I probably can back it out. Not all. I didn't have it all the way in, but I had it quite far in. But I just don't know until I've got the chain tension how much I'll have to adjust that. So I probably just did a little bit of overkill adjustment there. But at least I have my horizontal range of this derailleur all set. So that's rear derailleur installed. Rear derailleur complete. Well, rear derailleur attached to frame and limits set, and B screw dialed in a little bit, although I can adjust that later on once I have, like I said, the actual tension of the chain. So next up will be applying the front derailleur.